The night sky above Outpost Echo was burning. Crimson streaks of plasma fire tore through the atmosphere, leaving glowing trails as they descended on the battered colony below. Explosions erupted in the distance, shaking the ground and rattling the makeshift metal structures. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid smell of burning metal and scorched earth mixing with the sharp scent of human fear. Screams echoed across the battered colony as human soldiers scrambled for cover, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. The XL Voran fleet was relentless, their sleek black dreadnoughts hanging above the colony like vultures over a dying carcass. Sergeant Ryan Carter lay flat on his stomach on the rocky ridge overlooking the battlefield. His breathing was steady despite the chaos around him. Through the scope of his sniper rifle, he watched the XL Voran ground forces moving in coordinated precision, mechanical and efficient. Their silver armor reflected the glow of the fires as they advanced, their plasma rifles discharging bright blue bolts into the scrambling human defenders. Ryan's finger rested lightly on the trigger, his enhanced visor scanning the battlefield, marking targets. He knew how this would end. The XL Voran never left survivors. Ryan's earpiece crackled with static before the strained voice of Lieutenant Harris broke through. "Ryan, we're losing ground. Damn it, they're cutting through the barricades." A burst of gunfire followed by a scream cut off the transmission. Ryan's jaw tightened, his heart hammered in his chest, but his hands remained steady. Through his scope, Ryan spotted a tall figure in dark crimson armor standing at the rear of the advancing XL Voran line. A commander. His helmet's curved design and the black insignia on his shoulder marked him as a high-ranking officer. Ryan adjusted his aim, feeling the cool metal of the trigger beneath his finger. The sound of his heartbeat faded. The battlefield noise dulled. His breathing slowed. He fired. The railgun round left the barrel with a faint hum, cutting through the air faster than sound. A half-second later, the XL Voran commander's head exploded in a burst of green-black fluid. The body crumpled to the ground. Instantly, the XL Voran formation faltered. Soldiers hesitated. Ryan smiled grimly. He marked his next target and fired again. Another officer dropped. Then another. The XL Voran's cold, mechanical precision was breaking. Their fear was palpable now. The XL Voran had advanced weaponry, superior numbers, and impenetrable ships. But they had one weakness: psychological warfare. Ryan had seen it before. Take out the officers, and the grunts lose direction. Ryan shifted his position slightly, letting his cloaking suit adjust to the terrain. The advanced human tech wrapped light around his body, making him nearly invisible to the naked eye and enemy scanners. The suit hummed faintly against his skin, adjusting for temperature and position. His rifle recharged with a soft click. "Sergeant Carter, this is command." A voice crackled in his earpiece. It was Colonel Vasquez. "We got reports of officers going down across the sector. Are you responsible for that?" "Yes, sir," Ryan said without emotion. A pause. "Good work. Keep it up. Reinforcements are 2 hours out." Ryan's mouth twisted into a thin line. 2 hours. They wouldn't last 2 hours. Not with the XL Voran bringing down orbital bombardments. His eyes narrowed as he watched one of the dreadnoughts hovering above the colony, its massive plasma cannon charging with a low, menacing hum. Ryan adjusted his scope, marking the cannon's weak point, but his rifle wasn't strong enough to take down a dreadnought. Movement in his peripheral vision drew his attention. A squad of XL Voran soldiers, heavily armored, was advancing toward a human barricade. One of the soldiers, a young recruit, barely out of training, fumbled with his rifle as the XL Voran closed in. Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. A clean shot to the leader's head dropped the first alien. The second and third went down with quick follow-up shots. The human recruit stared wide-eyed in disbelief, then scrambled to safety. "You're welcome," Ryan muttered. A sudden, piercing beep in his helmet made him freeze. His HUD flared red. An enemy targeting signal locked onto his position. Ryan rolled to the side an instant before a plasma bolt struck the ground where he'd been. He slid down the ridge, raising his rifle as two Voran scout drones swooped toward him. He fired twice. Direct hits. The drones exploded in midair, sending burning fragments raining down the hill. Ryan's visor flickered as ECKO, his AI companion, came online. "Sergeant," ECKO's calm voice echoed in his ear. "Cloaking field at 65%. Multiple hostiles closing on your position." "Yeah, I noticed," Ryan grunted, already moving. He slid behind a broken section of the colony wall, swapping out the power cell in his rifle. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding him. "The Voran commander has marked you as a high-value target," ECKO said. "They're deploying more units to eliminate you." Ryan smiled darkly. "Good, let them come." An explosion rocked the ground, forcing Ryan to brace himself against the wall. Overhead, the Voran dreadnought's plasma cannon fired a beam of light down onto the colony. A section of the colony wall disintegrated under the blast, sending debris flying. Screams followed. Ryan swore under his breath. He raised his rifle and fired at a nearby squad of Voran troops. Two dropped instantly. The others scattered. Ryan's breathing quickened as his cloak's power reserves drained rapidly. His hands were starting to shake from exhaustion. He needed to fall back, regroup. But as he turned, he spotted a cluster of Voran troopers advancing toward a shelter where wounded human soldiers were huddled. Ryan's jaw clenched. He took aim and fired. 3 precise shots, 3 kills. The remaining troopers turned toward him, plasma rifles charging. Ryan ducked behind cover as the wall exploded behind him. "Sergeant," ECKO's voice cut through the noise. "Power levels critical. You need to retreat." "Not yet," Ryan growled. He pulled a small device from his belt, a cluster charge. He armed it and lobbed it over the wall. The explosion ripped through the Voran squad, sending bodies flying. Ryan emerged from the smoke, rifle raised. He finished off the survivors with cold efficiency. As the smoke cleared, Ryan lowered his rifle. His body ached. Blood from a burn on his shoulder was staining his suit. His cloak was flickering, barely holding together. Through his scope, he spotted another Voran commander standing at the edge of the battlefield. This one was taller, bulkier. Ryan adjusted his aim, knowing the shot would drain the last of his rifle's charge. He fired. The railgun round hit the commander's head. The Voran's body stood motionless for a second before collapsing. Silence fell over the battlefield. Ryan lowered his rifle. ECKO's voice came through his helmet. "Sergeant, they're retreating." Ryan leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. He stared out at the burning horizon as the Voran troops began to withdraw. Ryan smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." The frozen moon of Voltura 7 was deathly quiet. Pale blue light from the nearby gas giant filtered through the thin atmosphere, casting long shadows across the jagged ice fields. The surface was a wasteland of frost and broken rock, where nothing living should have survived. But something moved through the ice and shadows, something fast and silent. Sergeant Ethan Drake crouched low behind a ridge of ice, his breathing steady despite the sub-zero temperatures. His visor's thermal display scanned the landscape ahead, showing nothing but the faint heat signatures of distant Voran patrols. He adjusted his grip on the sniper rifle resting against his shoulder, its matte black surface absorbing what little light remained. His cloaking suit hummed softly, blending him into the icy terrain. "Drake, come in." The voice of Captain Rice crackled through his earpiece. "We've got movement on the eastern perimeter. Looks like a scouting party." Drake's eyes narrowed beneath his visor. "Confirmed," he said calmly. His enhanced HUD lit up, marking the approaching Voran units with red silhouettes. 5 of them. He settled into position, letting his body press into the cold surface beneath him. His gloved finger hovered over the trigger. "Orders?" he asked. "Engage," Rice replied. Drake didn't hesitate. His fingers squeezed the trigger. The railgun let out a soft hum as the round left the barrel at hypersonic speed. A Selvoran soldier's head exploded in a spray of green-black fluid. Before the others could react, Drake fired twice more. 2 more bodies collapsed to the ground. The remaining soldiers scrambled for cover, barking in their alien language. "Shit," Rise muttered through the comms. "They're scrambling reinforcements." Drake's breathing remained steady. His heart hammered, but his hands were still. His visor flickered with new heat signatures, a larger squad closing in fast. At least 15 of them. Too many for him to take down alone. Drake rolled onto his side, letting his cloaking field wrap around him as he slid down the ridge. He moved quickly and silently, leaving no trace of his position. The Selvoran squad advanced, their crimson visors scanning the ice. One of them crouched near the body of a fallen comrade, his long claws brushing the broken helmet. A single shot rang out. The soldier's head snapped back, his body collapsing. Panic erupted among the squad as the Selvoran scattered, firing blindly into the darkness. "Where is he?" One of them growled in their native tongue. "He's here," another screamed. Drake smiled grimly. They couldn't see him. They couldn't track him. He was a ghost in the darkness. He slid behind a jagged ice formation, watching as the Selvoran searched the area with growing desperation. One of them edged too close to his position. Drake lunged out, drawing his combat knife in one swift motion. The blade slid cleanly into the soldier's throat. The Selvoran's body convulsed as Drake lowered him to the ground soundlessly. 3 down, Drake whispered. The others heard the sound and rushed toward the source. Drake fired twice, dropping 2 more before shifting position. His cloaking field flickered briefly before resetting. One of the remaining soldiers spotted the distortion. There, plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Drake dove behind cover. His cloak's power was draining fast. A bolt struck the edge of his cover, sending shards of ice raining down on him. His rifle's energy cell peeped a warning. "Low charge." "Captain," Drake hissed into the comm. "I'm pinned down. Need backup." "We're tied up at the southern ridge," Rise replied. "You're on your own." Drake swore under his breath. His tactical display showed 4 hostiles closing on his position. His mind raced through options. He had 1 shot left. The lead Selvoran rounded the corner, plasma rifle raised. Drake's cloak dropped as he lunged forward, driving his knife into the alien's side. The soldier screamed as Drake pulled the knife free and fired point-blank into the next soldier's head. The railgun's recoil slammed into his shoulder. The 3rd alien rushed him, claws flashing. Drake sidestepped and fired again. The shot blew a hole clean through the Selvoran's chest. The 4th soldier hesitated just long enough for Drake to launch himself forward, driving his boot into the alien's knee. The Selvoran collapsed. Drake crouched over the fallen soldier, pressing the edge of his knife to the alien's throat. The soldier's black eyes widened with fear. "Where's your commander?" Drake growled. The soldier bared his teeth. "You're too late, human. The fleet is coming." Drake's eyes narrowed. He drove the knife in and stood as the alien's body went limp. He stepped over the bodies, scanning the ice fields. His visor's tactical display flared with a massive heat signature rising over the horizon. Drake's jaw tightened. The Selvoran dreadnought. The massive vessel descended slowly from the sky, its hull bristling with weaponry. Bright blue lights pulsed along its dark surface, illuminating the ice fields below. Drake's visor scanned the ship's structure. Its primary cannon was already charging, a low hum resonating through the frozen ground. "Drake," Rias's voice was tense. "We've got a problem." "Yeah, I see it," Drake replied. The dreadnought's weapons locked onto the human outpost. The colony was still 5 kilometers away, too far for anyone to reach in time. Drake took a deep breath. He switched his rifle to manual mode and activated the high-velocity charge. The barrel hummed and glowed faintly. His HUD marked a weak point on the dreadnought's underbelly, a small thermal vent, a nearly impossible shot. Drake took a knee, exhaled slowly, and aligned the crosshairs. "Come on," he whispered. He pulled the trigger. The railgun fired with a sharp, piercing crack. The round streaked through the night sky, cutting through the thin atmosphere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a bright explosion erupted from beneath the dreadnought. The massive ship listed to one side, sparks and fire spilling from the damaged vent. The low hum of the charging cannon faded into silence. "Holy shit," Rise whispered. Drake smiled faintly. "Not bad." The dreadnought began to retreat, its thrusters igniting as it pulled away from the moon's surface. The remaining Selvoran troops on the ground scrambled toward escape shuttles. Drake stood, watching the battlefield fall into silence. His rifle hummed as it recharged, his cloak slowly regenerating. "Drake," Rias's voice came through the comm. "You alive?" "Yeah," Drake said. "Nice shot." Drake's smile widened. "Yeah, I know." He turned and started toward the colony, the frozen winds cutting across the ice as the last of the Selvoran disappeared into the dark sky. The Phantom Hunter had struck again. The frost-covered wasteland of Altura 7 stretched endlessly beneath the dim glow of the gas giant in the sky. Jagged peaks of ice stood like the teeth of some ancient predator, and the wind howled through the cracks in the frozen ground. Sergeant Ethan Drake lay flat against the cold surface, his body hidden beneath the active camouflage of his cloaking suit. The thin layer of frost that had gathered on his armor made him blend even more into the environment. His breathing was steady despite the frigid air cutting through his suit's insulation. Through the scope of his railgun, Drake scanned the area ahead. His HUD displayed red heat signatures moving slowly across the ice. Selvoran scouts. 5 of them. Their long armored bodies shimmered under the weak light, their rifles slung across their backs. They were moving carefully, scanning the ground with clawed hands and flicking their long tails behind them. They were hunting, and Drake was their prey. "Drake, Citrip," Captain Rice's voice crackled through his earpiece. Drake adjusted the focus on his scope. 5 scouts moving southwest, 2 o'clock from my position. They're sweeping the area. They know someone's here. Copy that. Hold position. Reinforcements are 2 minutes out. Drake's eyes narrowed behind his visor. 2 minutes was an eternity when you were being hunted. His finger hovered over the trigger as the lead Selvoran scout paused just meters from his position, his dark red visor scanning the ice. A sudden vibration beneath the ice made Drake tense. His visor flickered with an alert. Heavy movement below. Drake shifted his focus, switching to thermal view. A large mass was moving underground. A Selvoran tunneler. His jaw tightened. "Reyes," Drake whispered. "They've got a tunneler beneath us." "Shit," Reyes muttered. "Stay sharp. We're rerouting." Drake felt the ground beneath him tremble. The lead Selvoran scout tilted his head as if listening to the vibrations. Then his head snapped toward Drake's position. His visor flared red. Drake fired. The railgun hummed as the hypersonic round exploded through the alien's helmet, sending the body collapsing to the ground. Before the others could react, Drake rolled to the side and fired twice more. 2 more bodies hit the ice. The remaining scouts scrambled for cover, barking orders in their guttural language. A sudden blast erupted beneath Drake as the ground shattered beneath his feet. The tunneler breached the surface with a deafening screech, its metallic exoskeleton reflecting the dim light. A massive maw of interlocking teeth opened wide, and Drake barely rolled aside as the creature lunged at him. Drake hit the ground hard, his visor flashing red with damage alerts. He scrambled to his knees as the tunneler's spiked tail whipped toward him. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. Plasma bolts flew over his head as the remaining Selvoran scouts closed in, taking advantage of the chaos. Drake's cloak flickered and failed. He was fully exposed. He dove behind an ice outcropping as plasma fire melted the frozen surface around him. He switched his rifle to close-range burst mode, took a breath, and popped out of cover. His first shot took down one of the scouts. His second clipped another's leg. The third scout lunged forward, claws extended. Drake sidestepped and fired point-blank. The railgun's recoil slammed into his shoulder as the alien's chest erupted in a spray of green-black blood. The tunneler roared behind him, its enormous body curling around the ice field. Its head reared back, a sickly green glow building in its throat. "Drake!" Reyes's voice cut through the noise. "Get clear. Heavy ordnance incoming." "Too late," Drake yelled. The tunneler's mouth opened wide, releasing a torrent of plasma. Drake sprinted toward the edge of the ridge, diving just as the ground exploded behind him. The shockwave sent him sprawling. His HUD flickered and went dark. His rifle clattered across the ice. His ears rang. He rolled onto his back, blinking as the blur of the battlefield sharpened. The tunneler was turning toward him, its mouth glowing bright green. Drake reached for his rifle, but his fingers brushed empty ice. The ground beneath the tunneler exploded in a cascade of fire and smoke. A missile struck its armored side, sending pieces of metal and flesh flying. Drake shielded his face as debris rained down. "Drake, you still breathing?" Reyes's voice was calm. Drake sat up, coughing. "Yeah, you took your time." A squad of human troopers in gray combat armor approached through the smoke, rifles raised. The lead soldier extended a hand toward Drake. Drake took it and stood. The battlefield around them was littered with dead Selvoran scouts and smoking wreckage from the tunneler. The human troopers fanned out, securing the perimeter. "Command says this was a distraction." Reyes's voice came through the comm. Drake wiped the frost from his visor. "A distraction for what?" Reyes's voice was tense. "We just lost contact with Outpost 9. Drake's expression hardened. He turned toward the horizon, where the dark silhouette of a Selvoran warship was descending through the thin clouds. "They're cutting off our supply lines," Drake said. "That's not all," Reyes replied. "Intel says they're deploying the Blood Guard." Drake's stomach tightened. The Blood Guard were Selvoran elite, genetically enhanced killers with a reputation for brutality. "We need to regroup," Drake said. "We can't hold this line alone." "No time," Reyes replied. "They'll hit the colony in less than an hour." Drake picked up his rifle and reloaded. His visor hummed back to life, tactical overlays flickering into place. "Then we stop them here," he said. "Drake," Reyes hesitated. "There's no backup coming." "I know." Drake's eyes locked on the approaching warship. His grip tightened around the rifle. His muscles ached, and his lungs burned from the cold air, but his breathing remained steady. He wasn't going to let them take the colony. He wasn't going to let them win. He stepped toward the edge of the ridge, raising his rifle. "Tell command to reroute the defense batteries to my coordinates," Drake said. Reyes's voice was sharp. "You're planning to hold the ridge alone." Drake's mouth curled into a faint smile. "Not for long." Above him, the warship's lights flared to life as the first landing pods broke through the atmosphere. The wind howled through the ice fields as the Blood Guard descended. Drake steadied his rifle and took a deep breath. "Come and get me," he whispered. The frost-covered wasteland of Voltura 7 stretched endlessly beneath the dim glow of the gas giant in the sky. Jagged peaks of ice stood like the teeth of some ancient predator, and the wind howled through the cracks in the frozen ground. Sergeant Ethan Drake lay flat against the cold surface, his body hidden beneath the active camouflage of his cloaking suit. The thin layer of frost that had gathered on his armor made him blend even more into the environment. His breathing was steady despite the frigid air cutting through his suit's insulation. Through the scope of his railgun, Drake scanned the area ahead. His HUD displayed red heat signatures moving slowly across the ice. Selvoran scouts. 5 of them. Their long, armored bodies shimmered under the weak light, their rifles slung across their backs. They were moving carefully, scanning the ground with clawed hands and flicking their long tails behind them. They were hunting, and Drake was their prey. Drake, Citrip, Captain Rice's voice crackled through his earpiece. Drake adjusted the focus on his scope. 5 scouts moving southwest, 2 o'clock from my position. They're sweeping the area. They know someone's here. Copy that. Hold position. Reinforcements are 2 minutes out. Drake's eyes narrowed behind his visor. 2 minutes was an eternity when you were being hunted. His finger hovered over the trigger as the lead Selvoran scout paused just meters from his position, his dark red visor scanning the ice. A sudden vibration beneath the ice made Drake tense. His visor flickered with an alert. Heavy movement below. Drake shifted his focus, switching to thermal view. The large mass was moving underground. A Selvoran tunneler. His jaw tightened. Reyes, Drake whispered. They got a tunneler beneath us. Shit, Reyes muttered. Stay sharp. We're rerouting. Drake felt the ground beneath him tremble. The lead Selvoran scout tilted his head as if listening to the vibrations. Then his head snapped toward Drake's position. His visor flared red. Drake fired. The railgun hummed as the hypersonic round exploded through the alien's helmet, sending the body collapsing to the ground. Before the others could react, Drake rolled to the side and fired twice more. 2 more bodies hit the ice. The remaining scouts scrambled for cover, barking orders in their guttural language. A sudden blast erupted beneath Drake as the ground shattered beneath his feet. The tunneler breached the surface with a deafening screech, its metallic exoskeleton reflecting the dim light. A massive maw of interlocking teeth opened wide, and Drake barely rolled aside as the creature lunged at him. Drake hit the ground hard, his visor flashing red with damage alerts. He scrambled to his knees as the tunneler's spiked tail whipped toward him. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. Plasma bolts flew over his head as the remaining Selvoran scouts closed in, taking advantage of the chaos. Drake's cloak flickered and failed. He was fully exposed. He dove behind an ice outcropping as plasma fire melted the frozen surface around him. He switched his rifle to close-range burst mode, took a breath, and popped out of cover. His first shot took down one of the scouts. His second clipped another's leg. The third scout lunged forward, claws extended. Drake sidestepped and fired point-blank. The railgun's recoil slammed into his shoulder as the alien's chest erupted in a spray of green-black blood. The tunneler roared behind him, its enormous body curling around the ice field. Its head reared back, a sickly green glow building in its throat. Drake. Reyes's voice cut through the noise. Get clear. Heavy ordnance incoming. Too late, Drake yelled. The tunneler's mouth opened wide, releasing a torrent of plasma. Drake sprinted toward the edge of the ridge, diving just as the ground exploded behind him. The shockwave sent him sprawling. His HUD flickered and went dark. His rifle clattered across the ice. His ears rang. He rolled onto his back, blinking as the blur of the battlefield sharpened. The tunneler was turning toward him, its mouth glowing bright green. Drake reached for his rifle, but his fingers brushed empty ice. The ground beneath the tunneler exploded in a cascade of fire and smoke. A missile struck its armored side, sending pieces of metal and flesh flying. Drake shielded his face as debris rained down. Drake, you still breathing? Reyes's voice was calm. Drake sat up, coughing. Yeah, you took your time. A squad of human troopers in gray combat armor approached through the smoke, rifles raised. The lead soldier extended a hand toward Drake. Drake took it and stood. The battlefield around them was littered with dead Selvoran scouts and smoking wreckage from the tunneler. The human troopers fanned out, securing the perimeter. Command says this was a distraction. Reyes's voice came through the comm. Drake wiped the frost from his visor. A distraction for what? Reyes's voice was tense. We just lost contact with Outpost 9. Drake's expression hardened. He turned toward the horizon, where the dark silhouette of a Selvoran warship was descending through the thin clouds. They're cutting off our supply lines, Drake said. That's not all, Rise replied. Intel says they're deploying the Blood Guard. Drake's stomach tightened. The Blood Guard were HFY Voran elite, genetically enhanced killers with a reputation for brutality. We need to regroup, Drake said. We can't hold this line alone. No time, Rise replied. They'll hit the colony in less than an hour. Drake picked up his rifle and reloaded. His visor hummed back to life, tactical overlays flickering into place. Then we stop them here, he said. Drake. Rise hesitated. There's no backup coming. I know. Drake's eyes locked on the approaching warship. His grip tightened around the rifle. His muscles ached, and his lungs burned from the cold air. But his breathing remained steady. He wasn't going to let them take the colony. He wasn't going to let them win. He stepped toward the edge of the ridge, raising his rifle. Tell command to reroute the defense batteries to my coordinates, Drake said. Race's voice was sharp. You're planning to hold the ridge alone. Drake's mouth curled into a faint smile. Not for long. Above him, the warship's lights flared to life as the first landing pods broke through the atmosphere. The wind howled through the ice fields as the Blood Guard descended. Drake steadied his rifle and took a deep breath. Come and get me, he whispered. Drake crouched low against the ice-covered ridge, his rifle pressed tightly to his shoulder. His visor's tactical overlay was alive with red markers, enemy heat signatures moving rapidly toward his position. The HFY Voran warship loomed in the sky above like a predator ready to strike, its hull gleaming under the weak light of the gas giant. Dropships were descending from the underbelly of the ship, dark metallic bodies slicing through the thin atmosphere like knives. Drake's HUD flashed an incoming alert as the Blood Guard began deploying. Reyes, I've got movement on the east ridge, Drake whispered into his comm. His breath misted inside his helmet. Copy that. Command says reinforcements are still 10 minutes out. 10 minutes is too long, Drake replied. His gloved fingers tightened around the grip of his rifle. They'll overrun us before then. A plasma bolt exploded against the ice just a few meters from him, sending shards of frozen debris scattering into the air. Drake rolled behind a jagged outcropping of ice and swung his rifle toward the source of the shot. A Blood Guard warrior stood at the crest of the ridge, its tall, sinewy frame outlined by the flickering light of the dropships. Its armor was black and edged with crimson, a mark of the HFY Voran elite. The creature's elongated face twisted into a cruel smile as it raised its plasma rifle. Drake fired first. The railgun hummed as the hypersonic round tore through the Blood Guard's chest, sending the creature tumbling backward into the snow. But more were coming. Dozens of heat signatures crowded his HUD. The Blood Guard were faster and stronger than regular HFY Voran troops, and they were closing in fast. Drake, fall back to secondary position. Reyes's voice came through the comm. Negative, Drake said. They'll push through if I don't hold this ridge. Damn it, Drake. Drake ignored him. He ducked as another plasma bolt seared past his head. He rolled out of cover and fired 3 quick shots. 2 Blood Guards collapsed, their dark blood staining the white snow beneath them. The third charged forward with a curved plasma blade in hand. Drake twisted to the side as the blade sliced past his shoulder. He drove the butt of his rifle into the creature's helmet, staggering it, and followed up with a shot straight into its chest. The Blood Guard fell limp at his feet. His HUD flared with an incoming alert. Above him, the warship's plasma cannons were warming up. The high-pitched whine filled the air as the ship's massive guns powered up. Drake's heart pounded. If those cannons fired, the ridge would be obliterated. Reyes, tell command we need to take down that ship. Reyes's voice was sharp. We don't have the firepower. We do now, Drake said, his eyes narrowing as his targeting reticle locked onto the ship's plasma core beneath the hull. Drake, what are you? Drake pulled the portable targeting beacon from his belt and activated it. A red triangle appeared on his HUD, marking the ship's weak point. He switched his rifle's mode to high-velocity penetration. His visor flashed red as the targeting system adjusted for distance and trajectory. His breath steadied. "Drake, that core is shielded," Reyes shouted. Drake adjusted his stance, leveling the rifle's barrel toward the core. His targeting reticle blinked as it calculated the shot. His breathing slowed. The Blood Guard were closing in. He could hear the pounding of their boots against the ice. He didn't have time to wait. His finger hovered over the trigger. A Blood Guard leaped toward him. Drake fired. The railgun's recoil hammered against his shoulder as the hypersonic round tore through the creature midair. Blood splattered across the ice. Drake quickly adjusted his aim and squeezed the trigger again. The round slammed into the warship's plasma core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the core flared. The shield surrounding it shimmered and failed. The core pulsed bright blue before detonating in a blinding burst of energy. The warship's hull split open with a deafening explosion. Debris and fire rained down as the ship buckled and began to fall. Drake scrambled to his feet and ran as pieces of the ship slammed into the ground around him. The impact shook the ridge, sending cracks racing across the ice. Drake dove behind a boulder as the ship crashed into the valley below, a wave of fire and smoke erupting from the impact site. "Drake, come in." Reyes's voice was frantic. Drake coughed and pulled himself up, his armor scared and smoking. Still breathing. "Jesus, you actually did it." Drake's eyes narrowed. His HUD was still lit with enemy markers. The Blood Guard were regrouping despite the loss of the ship. Their commanders were moving to the front lines. "This isn't over yet," Drake said. "Reinforcements are 3 minutes out," Reyes replied. "Then I'll hold them for 3 more minutes." Drake reloaded his rifle and stepped toward the edge of the ridge. A line of Blood Guard warriors stood in formation beneath the smoking wreckage of the warship. Their leader, taller than the others, stepped forward, black armor gleaming beneath the dark sky. It held a curved plasma sword in one hand and a heavy shield in the other. Its red eyes glowed beneath its helmet. "Come, human," the creature hissed through its helmet. Drake raised his rifle. The Blood Guard charged. Drake fired. The first shot slammed into the leader's shield, barely denting it. Drake rolled to the side as the plasma sword struck the ground beside him, sending up a spray of molten ice. He fired again, this time at the warrior's knee joint. The creature stumbled. Drake moved in close, driving the barrel of his rifle beneath the creature's helmet and firing. Its head snapped back, and it collapsed. The other Blood Guards rushed forward. Drake fired again and again, his rifle overheating as he took down one after another. His muscles screamed with pain, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. A Blood Guard tackled him from the side, sending him crashing into the ground. The creature's claws raked across his armor. Drake twisted and drove his knife into the alien's neck. Blood sprayed across his visor as he shoved the body aside. "Drake, reinforcements inbound," Reyes shouted. Above him, the streaks of human dropships cut through the dark sky. Railgun fire and missiles exploded across the battlefield as human forces descended onto the ice field. Drake pulled himself to his feet, his chest heaving. He watched as the Blood Guard were cut down by concentrated human firepower. A squad of human soldiers approached Drake. The lead soldier saluted. "Sergeant Drake, sir. We've got the field." Drake nodded. His armor was cracked, his rifle out of ammo. His body ached. He leaned against the ice and let out a slow breath. "Drake," Reyes's voice softened. "Hell of a shot." Drake smiled faintly. "Couldn't have done it without you." Drake looked toward the smoking wreckage of the Selvoran warship. The sky was clearing, and the dark silhouettes of human ships were cutting through the clouds. They had won this battle. But Drake knew the war wasn't over. Not yet. Drake's breath was ragged as he stumbled through the burning wreckage of the battlefield. The sky above was dark, lit only by the dying embers of the Selvoran warship's wreckage. Smoke curled through the frozen air, mixing with the sharp metallic tang of blood and burned flesh. His rifle hung loosely in his hand, the barrel scorched and battered. His armor was damaged, one of the shoulder plates completely gone, but he was still standing. "Drake, report." Reyes's voice crackled through the comm. Drake coughed, spitting blood onto the snow. "I'm still here." "Good. The enemy is regrouping at the ridge. They're preparing another push." Drake wiped his mouth and steadied himself. Through the smoke and the dim glow of the fires, he could see the silhouettes of the Blood Guard moving in the distance. Their tall, sinewy forms moved with eerie precision, their crimson armor gleaming beneath the weak starlight. There were too many of them. "We can't hold this position much longer," Reyes said. "Command says we need to pull back." Drake narrowed his eyes. "If we pull back now, they'll overrun the forward line. We lose this ridge, we lose the sector. We can't stop them alone." Reyes's voice was strained. "We need more time." Drake's eyes drifted toward the wreckage of the warship. Its massive hull lay split open across the ice, a twisted heap of metal and debris. But beneath the wreckage, he could see the faint blue glow of the Selvoran power core. "Reyes." Drake's voice sharpened. "The core is still active." "What?" "If we can detonate the core, we can wipe out the Blood Guard advance in one strike." "Drake, that core is unstable. If you get close enough to detonate it, there's no way you'll survive." Drake's jaw tightened. "I know." "Drake, no. There has to be another way." Drake glanced toward the approaching line of Blood Guard. Their heavy footsteps pounded against the ice, the sound vibrating through his bones. His ammo was nearly gone. His body ached from the beating he had already taken. He wouldn't survive another close engagement. "I'm out of options." "Reyes." "Drake." Drake cut the comm. He reloaded the last of his ammunition into his rifle and steadied his breath. His targeting system flickered, damaged from the earlier blast, but it was enough to lock onto the core beneath the wreckage. He sprinted toward the twisted hull of the ship. Plasma bolts screamed past him, searing through the air and exploding against the ice. He ducked and rolled, the heat burning through the exposed parts of his armor. He fired back, taking down 2 Blood Guards before they could reach him. "Almost there," he whispered. A Blood Guard warrior dropped down from above, landing heavily on the ice in front of him. Its black armor gleamed in the dim light, its plasma blade glowing red. It lunged. Drake dodged to the side, bringing up his rifle. The creature was fast, too fast. It struck him hard in the chest, sending him skidding backward across the ice. His helmet's display cracked, static flickering across his HUD. Drake rolled onto his back, just as the Blood Guard raised its blade to strike. Drake fired. The round tore through the creature's chest, sending it collapsing onto the ice. Drake pushed himself to his feet, panting. His visor flashed red, warning indicators blinking across the screen. He was running out of time. He stumbled toward the ship's hull and pulled a portable charge from his belt. His hand shook as he planted it against the exposed core. The core hummed beneath his fingertips, glowing with pulsing blue light. "Drake, report." Reyes's voice was frantic. "Charge is set," Drake said. His hand hovered over the detonator. "Drake, get the hell out of there." Drake's gaze drifted toward the battlefield. More Blood Guard were closing in. There was no way out. "Reyes, you need to pull the team back. Now." "Drake." "That's an order." Drake's finger hovered over the trigger. He knew what this meant. There was no escape. If he triggered the core, the explosion would vaporize everything within a kilometer radius. He wouldn't have time to run. A sudden flash of movement caught his eye. A dark shape leaped down from the ridge. Reyes. He was sprinting toward Drake, rifle raised. "Reyes, what the hell are you doing? You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you?" Reyes shouted, firing at the advancing Blood Guard. "Come on. We can make it." Drake's hand tightened on the detonator. "Reyes, move your ass." Drake hesitated. Then Reyes grabbed him by the arm and pulled him toward the edge of the wreckage. Plasma fire erupted around them as the Blood Guard swarmed the ridge. Drake and Reyes ran through the smoke and debris, Drake clutching the detonator in his hand. Behind them, the core began to pulse faster. Drake spun and fired behind them. The railgun round struck the core. The world erupted in light. Drake felt the shockwave slam into his back as the core detonated. He and Reyes were thrown through the air, crashing hard into the snow. A wall of fire and debris exploded outward, tearing through the advancing Blood Guard. Their black armored bodies were lifted and incinerated in the blast. Drake's visor shattered. His ears rang with the sound of the explosion. His body ached. He coughed and forced himself to sit up. Reyes was beside him, groaning. "You alive?" Drake croaked. Unfortunately, Reyes coughed. He sat up, wiping blood from his mouth. That was intense. Drake forced himself to his feet, his vision blurred, his knees weak beneath him. He could see the battlefield through the smoke and fire. The Blood Guard were gone. The wreckage of the ship was nothing more than twisted metal and burning debris. They had won. Reyes staggered to his feet. He clapped a hand on Drake's shoulder. Hell of a shot. Drake managed a faint smile. His chest ached. His legs were shaking beneath him, but he was still standing. A distant rumble echoed through the valley. Dropships were approaching. Human reinforcements. The fight was over. Drake turned toward Reyes. "Come on. Let's go home." They started walking toward the dropships. Drake's legs were heavy, but he forced himself forward, step by step. The cold bit into his exposed skin, but the pain didn't matter. They had survived. As they reached the edge of the battlefield, Drake glanced back toward the wreckage. The bodies of the Blood Guard lay scattered across the ice. The HFY War warship was reduced to smoldering ruins. Drake's hand tightened around his rifle. He knew this wasn't the last battle. The HFY War would come back. They always did. But today, humanity had sent them a message, and Drake was ready to send another. Drake sat in the dark corner of the transport ship as it drifted silently through space. The hum of the ship's engines was a low vibration beneath his feet, steady and constant. The emergency lights flickered dimly along the metal walls, casting long shadows across the hold. His rifle rested across his lap, his hands tightening and relaxing around the grip. His armor was still scorched from the last battle, the edges dented and scraped. Blood, some his, some not, still stained the black plating. Reyes sat across from him, his back against the wall. His helmet was off, revealing his bruised face and the jagged cut along his cheekbone. He was watching Drake carefully, his dark eyes narrowed with quiet concern. "You sure you're okay?" Reyes asked. Drake's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted toward the floor. "I'm still here." Reyes shook his head. "You shouldn't be." Drake's eyes flicked upward. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You were standing right on top of that core when it blew." Reyes's voice was low, but sharp. "No one walks away from that. Not in one piece." Drake's gaze darkened. He remembered the blast, the flash of light, the burning heat against his skin, the sound of his bones vibrating under the pressure of the shockwave. He remembered the feeling of weightlessness as the explosion threw him across the ice. He should have died. He knew that. But he was still here. "It wasn't luck," Reyes said. "And it sure as hell wasn't standard human biology." Drake's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" Reyes leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You know exactly what I'm saying." Drake's chest tightened. He had heard the whispers, the rumors among the ranks, the stories of a human sniper who had taken down an entire HFY War warship alone. The sniper who could fire a shot across kilometers of open space and never miss. The sniper who had survived injuries that would have killed anyone else. The phantom sniper. Drake scoffed. "That's just a story." Reyes's eyes sharpened. Is it? Drake didn't answer. He stood, slinging his rifle across his back as the transport's landing lights flashed. They were approaching the base. The familiar sight of the human fleet drifted into view through the narrow windows. Dark silhouettes of warships against the stars, their hulls glowing faintly with running lights. The massive defense platforms hung in the distance, bristling with heavy cannons and missile arrays. Orders just came through, Rice said as he stood. Command wants to see you. Of course they do, Drake muttered. The transport settled into the docking bay with a low hiss of pressurizing air. The loading ramp opened with a groan of hydraulics. Drake and Rice stepped into the cold metal corridor beyond. Soldiers and technicians moved quickly through the passageways, their boots clanging against the steel deck. Some of them glanced toward Drake as he passed. Furtive glances, whispered conversations behind raised hands. He ignored them. They reached the command room, a large, circular chamber lined with holo-displays. Tactical maps and fleet formations flickered in midair, data streams scrolling rapidly beneath them. At the center of the room stood Admiral Carson, her silver hair pulled back in a tight braid. Her uniform was crisp, the insignia of the Terran fleet gleaming on her shoulder. Lieutenant Drake. Carson's voice was sharp and direct. Admiral. Drake snapped to attention. Carson's eyes narrowed as she studied him. You detonated a Xelvoran core at close range and survived. Yes, Mom. How? Drake hesitated. His hand brushed unconsciously against the grip of his rifle. He didn't know the answer. He should have been dead. He felt the weight of Carson's gaze pressing down on him, the unspoken question hanging between them. Luck, he said finally. Carson's gaze sharpened. Luck. Drake's jaw tightened. With respect, Admiral, if you're looking for answers, I don't have them. Carson studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. We intercepted a Xelvoran transmission shortly after the battle. Drake frowned. And the Blood Guard have issued a standing kill order on you. Drake's chest tightened. Why? Carson's gaze was cold. Because you're not just a sniper anymore, Lieutenant Drake. You're a symbol, a human who took down an entire Xelvoran warship alone. To them, you're not a soldier, you're a threat. Drake's hand tightened around his rifle. Let them come, he said. Carson smiled faintly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The door behind Drake slid open. 2 officers entered, each carrying a sealed black case. They approached Drake and set the cases down at his feet. Carson gestured toward them. Open them. Drake knelt and unlocked the nearest case. Inside was a sniper rifle unlike any he had ever seen. Its barrel was black, etched with silver filigree along its length. The scope was advanced, military grade with an eye-linked targeting system. The ammunition was specialized, armor-piercing rounds coated in neutronium. The weapon was heavier than his standard rifle, but balanced perfectly in his hand. Drake's breath caught in his throat. What is this? A gift from command. Carson's gaze darkened. We can't explain how you survived the core detonation. But the fact remains, you did. We've reviewed the footage. Your body reacted to the blast in ways that defy standard human biology. Drake's gaze narrowed. You think I'm enhanced. I think you're special, Carson said. And now so does the enemy. Drake's jaw tightened. He lifted the rifle, testing its weight in his hands. The metal was cold beneath his fingers. It felt right, like it had been made for him. Carson's gaze sharpened. The Blood Guard will come for you now. They'll send their best. Good, Drake said softly. He chambered a round with a sharp click. Let them try. Carson smiled faintly. Welcome to the next phase of the war, Lieutenant Drake. Drake stood, his new rifle slung across his shoulder. Rice stepped up beside him, his own rifle resting against his hip. You know, Rice said with a smirk, you keep pulling stunts like this, people are going to start thinking you're the phantom sniper. Drake smiled faintly. Maybe I am. As they left the command room, Drake could feel the weight of the rifle on his back. The XL Vorin would come. He knew that. They would send everything they had to kill him. Drake's hand tightened around the grip of his rifle. Let them come.